In this video, we are going to be talking about the death of the dollar, but really King Dollar the Destroyer coming to destroy the world. Left a link down in the description to an article coming out of the South China Morning Post. I don't know how much you want to trust it, but whatever. Inside of this article, this is something that they had to say. These bonds circumvent the restrictions of the non-convertibility of the renminbi. Goes on to say this: at the same time, they possess a high-grade sovereign credit backing and liquidity, and minimizes the risk of sanctions or asset freezes due to the holding assets within the major U.S. financial systems, such as U.S. Treasury bonds. Now, I know this gets really confusing, but to understand the situation that we now face within the United States and the global economy is that the United States and the idea of being the world reserve currency is coming to an end. People hate the dollar. They don't want to participate in the dollar. They don't want anything to do with it. And every day we are hearing more and more about the rise of the BRICS nations and how gold is getting really, going to be the next item for currency to span across the globe for doing international transactions. We hear a lot of this kind of communication out there, but the reality of the situation is much different. Now, although they are trying to get out of the dollar as far as not holding on to U.S. Treasury bonds, this article goes on to really explain the truth of the matter, because the King Dollar, the Destroyer, is going to destroy the world. It goes on to say this. Let me see here. Where am I at? Sorry, this article is skipping around on me and like, damn computer's not stay still. All right, I just want to read the quote properly. All right, where is it at here? Here we go. He cited that the robust demand for Beijing's $4 billion denominated debt, did you hear it? $4 billion denominated. Right? Bonds issued in Hong Kong last week, which matched the U.S. borrowing costs for the first time, as an example. To understand that situation, they are getting out of dollars as far as the U.S. treasuries and all that, but they are issuing out debts that are due in dollars. Right? This is the problem that a lot of people don't really seem to think about or understand, that, yeah, they may be getting out of U.S. treasuries because they don't want to hold that particular asset, but they're still holding an asset that is due in dollars. And now this is really where I think a lot of people have lost the ability to understand how demanding the dollar will be going into the future. When those debts come due, they will demand dollars. And now if those dollars are difficult to find, then those dollar value, the strength of the dollar starts to increase. The more we find foreign nations that are writing debts that are due in dollars, the more of a demand for dollars will exist going into the future. This leaves a very big burden on the Federal Reserve. Now you think about it, the Federal Reserve is in a position in which that they have to meet dollar demand. If there is a liquidity issue that is taking place out there within the global economy where the dollar demand is really increasing, the Federal Reserve is in a position in which that they have to provide that liquidity out there to the world, or face the consequences of a rising dollar destroying the United States manufacturing that, with little exports we do have. Well, actually we have a lot of exports, but the exports that we do have get damaged from that. So maintaining a stable dollar when you have a huge demand for dollars outside of the United States is a very difficult task for the Federal Reserve to attempt to achieve. Something very interesting as we go through our research is something that Ben Bernanke said back in 2002. Okay? This is a speech that is November 21st of 2002. And now in this speech, he really addressed the situation. Maybe not entirely, but he certainly came up with an idea, or talked about an idea that the Federal Reserve could use in that circumstance. Okay? So here you have a situation. The global economy is demanding dollars because there is dollar-denominated debt that exists out there that is coming due. This dollar-denominated debt doesn't have anything to do with the United States except for the fact that it is due in dollars. Now, how is it that the Federal Reserve is going to provide the world with enough liquidity, enough dollars out there to meet the demand for dollars, considering all the debts that have been written in dollars that don't have anything to do with the United States. Here it is, the Federal Reserve is in a bind. They have to buy something out there to put on their balance sheet in order to put the money out there. I know a lot of people just say, oh, the Federal Reserve just prints out money willy-nilly and just throws it out there. That's not the way it works. They have to buy something. They have to have an asset, right? That asset goes onto their balance sheet and the liability goes out there. The liability, the Fed's liability, is all the dollars, all the reserves. So to understand that they have to purchase an asset first in order to get the dollars out there. And now what asset do they purchase? U.S. Treasuries. That's the main asset. The debt of the debt of the U.S. government. Now, something interesting that I found that Ben Bernanke had said back in 2002 was, excuse me, guys. Something that I had found interesting from a speech back in 2002 was this: the Fed can inject money into the economy in still other ways. For example, the Fed has the authority to buy foreign government debt. This is incredible to think about. The Federal Reserve already has the authority to buy foreign government debt as well as domestic debt. Potentially, this class of asset offers a huge scope for the Fed's operations, as the quantity of foreign assets eligible for purchase by the Fed is several times the stock of U.S. government debt. So now think about it. If all these nations all around the world started issuing out debt that is due in dollars, and the Federal Reserve is having a hard time trying to figure out how it is that they're going to provide all this liquidity out there to the world without sending the United States government on an unsustainable debt path. That is a very difficult task. However, he has already stated back in 2002, literally 24 years ago, that when the Federal Reserve is in a position that they are going to have to inject even more money into the system, and they are stuck in a position in which that if they buy any more government debt, they're going to send the United States on an unsustainable debt path. Think about what it is that Bernanke is saying here. They could go out there and buy foreign government debt. Well, think about the foreign government debt that is due in dollars. Doesn't that work out really swimmingly well for the Federal Reserve? That if you push this idea that they are trying to get out of dollars, or at least the dollar-denominated assets, literally creating their own dollar-denominated assets that gives the Federal Reserve the ability to buy so that they can inject even more money into the system? Does anybody get this? Am I just going way over everybody's heads on this, or are you grabbing it? Because this is super important. Like, this is something that I think is really honestly going to start taking place once we go into a stable coin or central bank digital currencies, or essentially get into a cashless society, which is coming. Remember what it is that Bernanke had said. They can buy the debt of a foreign nation. Well, if you got foreign nations who are like, hey, piss on this U.S. Treasury debt, we don't want any of that stuff, we're going to make our own dollar-denominated debt, gives all the assets in the world for the Federal Reserve to start buying. I don't know how many other people see it this way, but it certainly seems to be playing out very much in this pattern. And I know for a lot of people, they say, oh man, the dollar is dead, that it's not good, it's over, it's sunk. And I'm thinking, no, it's not. King Dollar is coming to destroy the world. People don't even realize how much dollar-denominated debt exists out there. Do you realize, even the Belt and Road Initiative coming from China had literally lent money to these nations in dollars? Those nations have to pay China dollars, US dollars, because that's what the loans were issued in. As the dollar strengthens and those nations can no longer pay their debts, who ends up benefiting from that? China. So if the dollar strengthens and these nations start to fail because they can't pay their dollar-denominated debt back to China, China ends up repossessing all the infrastructure that they lent money for. All those nations end up owing China and belong to China after that. This is a very dangerous position for the Federal Reserve to try and allow, like essentially allow to happen. They can't let that dollar strengthen like that. They have to figure out a way to inject ever increasing amounts of liquidity into the market. How do you do that without sending the United States on an unsustainable debt path other than to buy the foreign debt of buy the debt of a foreign government, and especially one that is issued in US dollars? Tell me this doesn't work out swimmingly well for the Fed. Absolutely perfectly. Am I right? All right. 10 minutes into this video, I hope you guys get the info. That's it. Like, I want to like compress it into 10 minutes. That's the bulk of it. If you can get it, man, this is going to be so valuable to you, because you're going to look at all the people who are out there screaming, ah, man, they're out of the dollar. Dollar sucks. Dollar's failing. And you're going to think about this video. Okay? You want to see something else that's really interesting? Go and look at dollar funding stresses in China. All right, that's an incredibly good document to read coming out of the Federal Reserve. And in fact, I think I have it somewhere in here. There it is. Oops. Dollar funding stresses in China. Excellent piece, right? That came out in November of 2022, talking about how it is that the dollar-denominated debt coming out of China is an incredible difficult thing for China to then deal with, as the stress of the lack of dollars starts to really impact their economy. We experienced this with the property developers over in China, as their dollar-denominated debt that they had issued out, because they're a corporation, just like all corporations, they can issue out debt, and their debt was issued out in dollars. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it was. And it's that portion of their dollar-denominated debt that is the most important, because if they can't pay that, the rest of the system begins to collapse. It is by far the most important part. Dollar funding and stresses in China is a key problem that the Federal Reserve is focused in on, knowing that there is going to be an issue that comes into the future, or else they wouldn't have made this document. Dollar funding stresses in China literally came out November 1st of 2022. Don't think that they ain't planning for this. They're planning for this problem. Right? Like, people say they don't know what they're doing. They do. Like, they're describing it right here for everybody to internalize, but nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to believe it. They think that the Fed doesn't know what they're doing, but yet here it is. Ben Bernanke says, hey, you know what? We're going to have a major issue here in about 20, 25 years. We might want to consider buying the debt of a foreign nation. Why? Because of this dollar funding stresses that are going to be taking place because of these nations who have issued out dollar-denominated debt. And like, I don't know how many other people can see this, but damn, talk about King Dollar coming to destroy the world. It's on its way. Everybody thinks that the dollar is failing, and I'm thinking, no way, man. When that stuff comes due, there's not going to be enough dollars in the system, and the Federal Reserve is going to be in a hell of a position trying to figure out how they're going to print up money fast enough in order to cover all that dollar-denominated debt that exists out there. They won't be able to do it. All right, moving on. All right, I said this month ago I was ignored. The Chinese manipulated the crypto market to do these predatory loans for Belt and Road. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that they did some sort of mischievous things. My gut tells me you've been right for quite a while. Jeff, I really appreciate that, man, and thank you, because what we are breaking down here is something that is unlike anything you're going to find anywhere else on the internet. Think about the documents that I share. Like, when I think, oh man, dollar funding stresses in China, how that is actually, like, this document came out 4 years ago, how it is that it's playing out now. How it is that I'm finding evidence of it every single day when I think about how it is that these other nations want to get out of the U.S. Treasury and then literally write their own debts in dollars. Right? To me, I'm thinking, no way, man, is this going away. This is only going to grow more intense. And you're going to find that the separation between the rich and the poor is going to grow ever increasingly more. The Federal Reserve is forced into a position to provide ever increasing amounts of liquidity. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that we have a wedge of inequality that is going to get absolutely incredibly difficult to deal with. Most people are not going to understand it. We are going to definitely be living two economies. two-tiered economy, those who are struggling, working poor, and those who have collected assets and they're cash flowing. There's going to be a huge difference between these two people. And I appreciate it, man. I mean, those who follow me for a long time, they've seen it. They've seen me call out many things. And although it's, not everything is going to be as accurate as like, being able to detail it out. But for the most part, when you think about some of the things that the credible threat theory has exposed and shown, it doesn't surprise me when people come to me and say, "Oh, dude, you're right again." And I'm like, I mean, I'm not trying to say, "Yeah, I told you so." But what I'm getting at is like, yeah, once you see this credible threat theory, it becomes obvious. It's not like, I mean, it's as obvious as like the sun coming up the next day. And they're like, "Dude, you're right again." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, but this is what's going to happen." It's like, it's not a matter of predicting, the sun coming up tomorrow. It's going to come up tomorrow, because just look at the evidence of it that's happened throughout, the months, the years, the weeks, whatever it takes. When you start going back and researching this stuff, it doesn't become something that is a guess. It's an obvious. Yeah. I don't know how, like, everybody wants to think that the Fed screwed up. And by doing that, you literally give the Fed the power that they needed. That's what's sad about this whole thing, is that 99% of the people out there believe that the Federal Reserve is flying by the seat of their pants. And by having that mentality towards that, they are literally hanging on every word that the Fed says. Every interpretation of whatever economist believes is happening with monetary policy, they are hanging on every word of that. And that is then manipulated and used against them. When you push back against that and you're like, okay, you guys are looking for elevated inflation and inflation expectation by any means possible. And why are you going to do it? Because so you can get that neutral interest rate up off the lower bound to zero. If you can do that properly, you can actually make the economy less restricted. Now, this is something that I have been saying for like 4 years now. I don't change that. That is what the Federal Reserve is attempting to do. I said it a long time ago. I have many videos out on it. I continue to say that because that is what it is that they're doing. I don't have to guess. It is. It just is. And all these other people have like interpreted it like in so many ways. Like, and I'm not saying like the things that the facts that they are using aren't accurate. What I am saying is that if you look at it far enough back, 20 years, right? Like at least, and you see the timeline and what is happening here, it just perfectly lines up. They were stuck at the lower bound of zero. That Fed funds rate at zero interest rate policy, the massive money printing, the quantitative easing, and all that other stuff. People will complain and bitch and moan about that, saying, hey, this was the inflationary pressure that came, that separated the rich from the poor and all that during that great financial crisis, and they are absolutely wrong. Right? Did it separate the rich from the poor from the asset holders? You're right. People who borrowed the money to buy cash flowing assets, borrowed the money to buy stocks, borrowed the money to buy bonds, they absolutely saw those things inflate. But the standard of living in which that people were living did not keep up in the inflationary scenario in which that the Federal Reserve would have expected, considering what happened to those asset prices. Now, again, people can interpret that any way they want. That's fine. They can say, hey, man, the Fed was lying. Cool, right? I can go with that. Doesn't matter. If you want to understand what's going on with monetary policy, you have to understand what the Federal Reserve was looking at. And they were looking at a situation in which that they had just printed up an insane amount of money and it failed to produce the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. That right there had a monetary policy that was failing, absolutely failing. And that was 2018. Knowing back then that they were looking for opportunistic reflation, average inflation targeting, which would have inflation running consistently, persistently above the 2% target. And this is something that they had described many years ago leading up to this event. It's not a surprise to see it occurring. When I read dollar funding stresses in China and think about the dollar denominated debt that exists outside of this country, that Jeff Snyder and Brent Johnson have been trying to share on their channels for a decade now. All right. This stuff becomes obvious to me that the dollar is not failing. All right. People want to believe that it's failing because we're 80% of the working class individuals. It's failing for us, right? So when you look out there and you're like, is it failing for you? Is it failing for you? Is it failing for you? All of these yeses are going to be said out there. But the obvious question that you should look at is, who is it not failing for? It's not failing for them. They're doing better than they ever have. And I'm talking about those who are on the upper side of the wedge. They want you to believe that it's going to fail. They want you to think that there's going to be inflation. They want you to have that understanding and belief system. Because every time you do that, you'll raise that neutral interest rate, makes the economy far less restricted for them. All right? This is important to understand. It's hard to internalize it because it's so backwards from what it is that everybody had been taught their entire life. They're a victim of their circumstances. We talked about that yesterday. All the schools, all the teachers, all the parents, all the bosses, everybody who had ever communicated about what it is that's happening with the government, happening with the Federal Reserve, had put the wrong impression into you. They only worked with the best that they knew, operating at the level of consciousness that they could, understanding what it is that they were told. But when you start diving into this, you ignore them and you start diving into it and researching it yourself, you start realizing, man, these people communicate to each other in a way that is so different from what it is that they're communicating out there on the mainstream. Never once have I seen the Federal Reserve or any of those officials come out on a mainstream media and deliver a message that is even remotely close to the credible threat theory, which is what I developed by reading their speeches. Isn't that incredible? Here it is. I have an entire theory that I have developed reading their speeches, using their speeches to prove the credible threat theory, and yet never once can I hear it come out on the mainstream media. Not one time. In fact, I find on the mainstream media the exact opposite. They tried to steer you down a direction that is not the credible threat theory. In fact, they tried to dismiss things like the credible threat theory. Right? Not that there's one to dismiss, but it's only mine. Nobody else knows about it. But ultimately, they're talking about how it is that the Federal Reserve looks for a 2% target and doesn't see anything else. And I think that's probably the most delusional thing out there when you're trying to understand monetary policy. The Fed is not trying to get to 2%. Okay? They're trying to get 2% over the long run, which is an average. They never once, ever in the history of their existence, ever been able to be at 2% inflation. For anybody to think that they can do it going into the future is very naive. Prove it. Prove that they have ever been able to do it in the past. They can't, and they won't. And being under the 2% target is dangerous as hell for them. They need to be persistently above that 2%, consistently, forever. Boy, I'm really, man, I drank too much coffee or something. What are we at? 11:57. All right, I got a few more minutes here. If U.S. fails to win the Iran war with much collateral damage to the Gulf states, allies, the perhaps U.S. carrier group is sunk, would you expect the dollar to tank sooner, or that doesn't matter? I doubt that's going to take, to think of a hypothetical situation as if they happen to accidentally lose the war, right? I mean, that's not the way it's going to go down. The mainstream media wants you to be rooting for Dallas Cowboys or Pittsburgh Steelers. Who are they? Are they important? Is that important to your monetary policy decisions? All right. USA can't win. You can't destroy Islam ideology. No, that's not the point. That they're not. Well, maybe that's what you think is the point of it. I don't believe that's the idea. I don't think there is a win that they're going for. Like there's no, that's not it. Not in my opinion anyway. Not from the things that I've studied. The winning is not the goal. Not even close. Under 2% can be dangerous for all of us as the debt-based currency system requires inflation. Absolutely, it does. They are psychopaths. They will not allow a loss. times. Okay. Trump has no plan for Iran leadership. We are screwed. I very seriously doubt that. All right, bankers have a 500-year plan. Regular people, best 5-year plan. Most run on 5-day work week plan. That's so true, Wayne. Absolutely. It is easier to control frightened people. Absolutely it is. Hey, you guys need anything from Costco? Yeah, it's easier to control. That's why I tell people don't live in fear, right? Living in fear is essentially going to prevent you from ever being able to make connections, to expand, to grow. Um, Fear is actually a good thing. Like lean into fear, lean into tension. If it's fearful, lean into that stuff. You know, people are like, "Oh man, scared, got to run away from it." That's going to be the problem. I don't get intimidated easy. Like I'm not like I mean some things intimidate me, I guess, but like I don't get like authority doesn't intimidate me. I'm not scared of that kind of thing. And you know, I mean, and maybe is my foolish part of it, but I'm just not, right? So when I hear people like, "Oh man, the cops are gonna come," I'm like, "Great," you know, it's like I am not that scared. So when it comes to like living in fear, you're easily controlled by that, right? If you're worried about that happening and you have to run away from it, that's control, right? They're preventing you from actually doing anything. And so when I think about living in fear, it's just like, man, if I fear it, I'm going to lean into it, right? I'm going to lean into that tension. And because that's where the magic is found. No matter what it is, like if you're nervous, if you're scared, if that's, you know, a problem and you lean into that, that's where the solutions is found. That's where the magic is found. You're never going to find it running away from fear ever, right? So if it's fear, lean into that, move into that, right? Like I'm scared to invest. I'm scared to do these things. Lean into that stuff. Like I experienced that myself with some things. As long as the U.S. has guns to other countries, the dollar will dominate. The dollar is going to dominate because there's really nothing else to use. That's the problem that I think a lot of people have misunderstood about BRICS nations and the rise of them using their currency. They literally do not have enough of the currency to perform all the transactions that the United States dollar is doing. Even if they wanted to, they're like, hey, abandon the dollar. It's just like, okay, so now we don't eat because we don't have any money to transact with because the BRICS nations don't have enough to do the transactions. And even if they wanted to, you have to trust them to issue out debt, a safe and liquid asset like the U.S. Treasury. There's no nation out there that is going to go into deep of debt as the United States has done to replace the U.S. Treasuries for the safe and liquid asset that can then be used as currency around the world. Nobody has that. No BRICS nation, the gold can't do it. Cryptocurrencies isn't going to do it. It has to come down to the United States failing completely for the rise of something else to happen. It's Gresham's law. And since the dollar is in huge demand, just look at the article, right? I mean, here they are writing out billions of dollars in US dollar denominated debt that doesn't have anything to do with the United States. That's going to be a very difficult task to deal with going into the future. Yeah. Great advice. Well, thank you very much. Telling and knowing the truth is not fear. Yeah. How come gold and crypto can't work? Okay, that's a great question. That's actually a really good question. How come it can't work? Why is it that the dollar took over gold? Well, let's think about this for just a second. Here it is, you had gold for all the currency for doing transactions, and although there's a little bit of paper out there, we're just going to assume that it's all gold. We, the United States, was a manufacturing powerhouse. We produced all the world's greatest stuff and we sent that stuff out there to the world, and the world sent us their gold. What happened to the rest of the world? They started losing their gold holdings because we had it. Well, now their transactions are diminishing because they don't have any currency to do transactions with because we have all the gold. You see what's happening here? So now when they started to say, hey, we're feeling some pain here because you have all the gold, the Federal Reserve was just like, well, we can print some money and have an elastic money supply. And when the economy is heating up and this gold concentration is taking place, we can issue out some paper currency to continue on with the business cycle. Since you guys want to do transactions, and that's really what you want to do, right? It's not the matter of holding the gold. You just wanted the gold so you can do transactions. And if it's transactions you want to do, well, we can give you paper and paper can do the transactions, yeah? And then you'd be happy because now you can do all the transactions you want. In fact, you can do an unlimited amount of transactions because you have all the paper currency in the world to do it with. Uh-oh, there's too much paper and not enough gold to back all that paper. Now you got something called Gresham's law kicking in. Because Gresham's law says the bad currency is going to chase out the good currency, and that's exactly what is happening there as the gold is getting hoarded away and ever-increasing amounts of paper is getting pushed out there to the system because the demand for paper to do transactions is now growing as the growth of people's business cycles and operations and their debt issuance and everything requires them to have ever-expanding amounts of money injected into the system. If you are going to do that, you are going to cause the hoarding of gold because it's the good currency. Let's make it simple. Let's say you came to me and you had a gold coin in one hand and some paper currency in the other, and you're like, hey man, I want to buy that computer from you. And I'm like, yeah, sure, cool, right? And you said, which one of these you'll take? And I look at it and say, I'll take either one of those. All right? You got gold in one hand and cash in the other, paper currency in the other. And you come to me and you say, hey man, I want to buy your computer. Which one of these will you take? And I say, either one. Are you really going to hand me that gold coin? I mean, honestly, are you going to hand me the gold coin? Probably not, right? You're probably going to hand me that cash. So cash is what's used in the economy, and the gold coin is getting hoarded away because gold is the good currency. Cash is the bad currency. Bad currency chases out good currency. Gold won't work. Not so long as the currency has as long as the paper currency is still in existence. Because the moment that you offer up these two, the gold coin is going to get hoarded away and the cash is going to be used inside of the economy. Now, the problem that we face if there was no cash and only gold is the Cantillon Effect. And this is my favorite one because what ends up happening here is that if you have a limitation of currency like gold, there's only so much of it out there. And if you are an industrial powerhouse, like you can really produce some goods and services or whatever it is, you're good at war, you're good at shipping, you're good at manufacturing, you're good at mining, whatever it is that you are really good at and you are able to get an abundance of money in, there's one thing that is definitely going to happen from that. You start bringing in a lot of money and you're going to start increasing your standard of living. Guaranteed. Every industrious person is going to want this in their life. They do work hard to enjoy their life. It makes sense, right? The moment that they enjoy their life, they're moving into a luxurious experience. When you start moving into a luxurious experience, you're driving the prices up. More people consuming, more people getting this new money, more people working, producing, sending that stuff out there to the world, getting that money, more consumption, more consumption, more consumption. Well, that consumption starts driving up the prices and the domestic manufacturers start to experience something that's very painful. And that is foreign competitors start making the same products that they are, maybe not as good at first, but they're certainly doing it cheaper. And now they're going to start sending those in to that particular location that has that high standard of living and that luxurious experience with all that abundance of money. Here come the foreign production, and out goes the domestic manufacturers. Now remember, this is all happening on a gold standard. The harder you work, the more gold you acquire, the higher standard of living you got, and the more you started buying the foreign production out there, because this is the equilibrium that takes place. When you concentrate the gold into the hands of a few, the natural course of things is a fall into poverty and that redistribution of wealth. Now, understanding that the gold currency system will go through this is fine. Just know it, right? When we have this concentration of wealth, we are going to fall into a time of no business, very depressionary moments. It's going to be short-lived and the cycle will start back over again. That is very painful for most people to deal with. If you understand it, it's fine. You know, you can get right through it. But most people don't know what's going on. And so as the business cycle is ramping up, they're like, woohoo, we're in the money. They do not prepare for that business cycle to turn. And then when it does, it is very devastating. You got problems with soup kitchens and poverty and all kinds of crap that's happening all over that particular economy. And the problem that is faced by it is that if you're on a gold standard, you can't just have the government come in and say, hey, we're going to take care of you with stimulus, because there's no stimulus to be had. You can't just print up. You can't just go into debt. So there's problems that are faced on both sides of these things. It's better to not think of a system that you can invent or come up with, or an idea of stability and security and awesomeness for everyone. It's much better to just push all that away, look at it for what it is, and then position yourself accordingly for the circumstances that you are faced with within this economy. Not everybody's going to be like, are you deep in debt with student loans, or are you like about ready to turn 18, graduate high school, and you have nothing going on in your life? Are you 80 years old trying to figure out how to hold on to what little bit of retirement you got left? These are so different from each other, but we're all operating in this same economy, right? Alrighty, makes sense. The only thing I'm confused on is how the paper money gets to the industrial nations after they feel the pain of the gold being gone. They don't feel the pain of the gold being gone. That's the point. They avoided the pain. That's why the gold is gone. See, the other, okay, the United States still has the gold. We were supposed to relinquish that gold back out to the rest of the world during the Nixon. Actually, we were supposed to do it before that. But anyway, the Nixon administration essentially ended it. Right? They said, no, we're not gonna redeem any paper dollars for gold thing, no more. Right? That right there, we should have experienced the depression of massive magnitude. But they said, no, we're gonna keep issuing out new currency. Because if we don't issue out new currency, the whole system collapses into pain and misery and poverty. So it's understanding that it wasn't like the gold goes back out there to the rest of the people like it did, or like it should have. The gold stayed concentrated, right? And now it's only in the hands of the few, and maybe some of the industrious nations who have acquired their gold back, but it's not like it's going back out there in a way that had this equilibrium found again to the most industrious nation. We're not the most industrious nation. Right? Well, I wouldn't put that. We are very industrious in a lot of ways, but we are very good at issuing out debt. We're not a producer of goods and services. We're a producer of a consumer. Right? Like that's what the United States produces. Consumers. We used to produce goods and services, but now we produce a consumer. Without the consumer, the entire economy falls apart. Simon, the more I earned and have makes me even more fragile. I don't agree with Cantillon Effect beyond what the Joneses keeping up with. The Jones Effect is. Thanks. I don't agree with the Cantillon Effect beyond what the Joneses... Well, I mean, you can disagree with the Cantillon Effect, but I've found it evidence so many times throughout history, even listening to other people talk about the economies of the world and what ended up happening and the destruction of it, and I'm like, well, that's all symptoms of the Cantillon Effect. Like every one of them, every time I hear it, it's just like it's a symptom of the Cantillon Effect. The rise and the increase in the industriousness, the rise of that money, the acquiring of money, and that rise of the and the rise of the luxurious experience. Like that, like you can just look at it in any single individual's life, a county, a city, a state, a country, it doesn't matter. It all goes down the same way. If you are industrious and you start earning money, what ends up happening? You raise your standard of living. You get a nicer car, you wear nicer clothes, you go to you move to a better apartment. All the luxurious experiences that come from it. It's not a matter of keeping up with the Joneses. You just want to enjoy your experience, right? Like I'm purposefully driving a 97 Suburban here because I absolutely love the idea of driving a cheap vehicle that then gives me the ability to then put money towards assets. Right? Securing a rate of interest beyond that of my occupation. You know what's funny about it is that is something that Cantillon had talked about inside of his essay. Right? People who do not at first increase their expenditures so that they can secure a rate of interest beyond that of their occupation. Then he also talked about a whole group of people who work eagerly hard to deal with the fact that the prices are increasing, but will not work much beyond that of their maintenance. He talked about these two groups of people. These things haven't changed, right? All right. Thanks, Simon, from a melting snow southern New England coast. Well, thank you so much, Silver Bar 1 for you. Is that what this is? Very cool. Afternoon, deja vu, all on my way out the door. All righty. Oh, thank you all night for posting the links. What time is it? Alrighty, guys, I'm going to call it quits here. I really enjoyed today's live stream. I think it's really important that we understand the situation that we now face with the dollar and the demand for dollars that exist outside of the United States. Every time I hear somebody talk about how the dollar is going to fail, how the BRICS nations are going to take over, I think about some of the things like Gresham's Law, and I think about the debt issuance itself. Like, how many of these other nations are you going to trust to then lend your money to in order to buy their bonds, knowing that they are going to pay them back plus the interest? Do you trust Russia? Do you trust Brazil? I mean, maybe Brazil on a little, they got, some export market there with agriculture and stuff. I mean, some of these guys you might trust a little bit, or do you trust U.S. Treasuries? Like guaranteed assets, zero chance of default. Which one do you trust? Like, the world trusts U.S. Treasuries. They don't trust anything else. U.S. Treasuries is plentiful in such a way that it is very broad and very deep, meaning that if you want to buy or sell a Treasury, instantaneous, very liquid. It's as good as cash. That's not the same for other debts out there. Only U.S. Treasuries hold that unique, and like some of them are pretty good, but not like the U.S. Treasury is. $2 from McGuire, is that what that says? Thank you so much. Been buying Swiss francs for a while, every paycheck. Interesting. How about reserve currencies not tied to a country? How do you not tie it to a country? What are you going to trust? The special drawing rights, like a basket of currencies coming from, International Monetary Fund or the Bureau of International Settlements or some of these, conglomerate of banking families and countries that get together? Like, I don't know if I trust that any differently than I would trust the Federal Reserve. Right? I don't know if it would be any different, like, in my opinion. Besides, it would all end up being the Federal Reserve anyway. Federal Reserve notes. Don't believe it's a zero chance of default. It is. It's a zero chance of default. The problem that we'll face is not the payment. It's the ability to use that payment to acquire any kind of benefit. Right? And although that may be a default within itself, it's not the technical default of them not paying out. So I disagree. I think that every single U.S. Treasury will be paid. And even if it was to the point that they turn to a toxic asset, I even think that the Federal Reserve would be like, okay, here, you just give us the treasuries that aren't paying, and we'll swap them out with the treasuries that are paying, so there are no defaulting toxic U.S. treasuries in the system. They'll all be sitting on the Fed's balance sheet. How do we know this? Because that's what they did with the mortgage-backed securities, right? The toxic assets back in the day. So it's not like they don't have a mechanism to deal with defaulting bonds. And then even on top of that, it would be like, who are you? You're that nation. You're an enemy of the nation. We're defaulting on your bonds. All right. I don't think that's the road that they would go down, because if they did that, then even the people that they didn't want to hurt would be like, whoa, we're next, right? But if you take hey, these bonds are defaulting, and you're like, oh, here, let me give you you take these, I'll take those toxic ones. Those ones will sit on our balance sheet, and we'll make sure that all the ones that are in the market are still good, right? Tell me that wouldn't add like a whole bunch of confidence to it. And they're like, oh, no, don't worry, man. Toxic asset? No way, man. Give those to us. We'll take all the toxic assets, I mean, it wouldn't be like a great thing, but it would, at least add some sort of confidence to the market, I guess. I don't know. Even a long shot. I gotta go, guys. All right. The U.S. has previously defaulted on what? When? The debt is fake. Another war proves it. Roll the dice, going for 8. All right, I'll roll the dice for you guys. Let's see what happens. Boom. All right, Simon, I said this earlier in your broadcast, but you were busy talking. The dollar doesn't need a direct replacement, only to be sidelined. Oh, there's something wrong. Sidelined by electronic payment systems. No, it doesn't. It has to have a safe and liquid asset backing it, or else it doesn't work. Right? Or else it doesn't work. And so you can, I mean, we can imagine it. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to deny the fact that a digital payment system would perform transactions. The problem that we would face is that nobody would use it, right? You got to have a promise. You got to have something on the backside of it that says, yes, this has some sort of like promise to it, right? And if it's just some odd currency out there like Bitcoin, nobody's going to trust it, right? I mean, you got a handful of people who are trusting in Bitcoin now, but that's just a handful of people. There's no legitimate use of Bitcoin, right? There's a legitimate use in gold, but not in Bitcoin because there's no value behind it. The only value that it has is the ability to transact with anybody anywhere in the world without government intervention once the transaction is set into motion. That's pretty damn cool. Like nothing else has that sort of feature, but that's the only feature it has. Nothing else. Literally nothing else, you know? And so for me, when I think about it, it was just like, that's not going to work. Gold isn't going to work. What's going to work is somebody's expectation that they will get paid back. That's what the U.S. Treasury has. Way more than anything else does. And I don't like it. I don't even like it. Like, I don't like it. Whatever, it ain't for me to like or dislike. It is what it is. And although you can come up with all kinds of schemes to say, hey, this can do it, nobody's going to trust it. Nobody trusts that and they're using it. Right? How are you going to get them to trust something that is completely imaginary if this has some sort of false expectation that is going to pay? Right? You're never going to do it. Like, I mean, even the false expectation is something. Alright, BTC is being used in South Africa, not so much in the USA. Money is made of markets go up or down. I can't stand Trump, but I trust him more than speaking Chinese. I guess that's the way to look at it. Sweet, sweet fiat. Yeah. Bitcoin is backed by the energy used to mine it in an abstract sense. This is the same as gold. No, gold has actual quality use to it because it can actually serve a purpose doing something other than sucking energy and performing a transaction. I mean, those are the only two things it does. Does it provide, like, Bitcoin provides a hell of a security to it, right? I mean, you got all those miners around the world trying to mine the Bitcoin. It's going to be very difficult to hack that system, to do the 51% takeover, all that. There's a security issue behind it that is high level. I get that part. Like, that part is quite unique and useful, but it's only useful to the transaction. That's the only thing that is really used for is that transaction. There's literally nothing else other than sucking the power and performing that transaction and having the security behind it. But that's it. Gold, I mean, hell, I got a ring on that's made of precious metals. I got a necklace, right? This serving purpose, at least it's jewelry inside of this computer. There's components that are being used that are silver and gold that make this thing work. The communication that we use is not dependent on cryptocurrencies, but is very much dependent on precious metals. I think about it, it was just like if you were to remove cryptocurrencies out of the system, nothing changes. Everything continues on. I mean, some people's lives might get disrupted. There might be some challenges that are faced, but for the most part, nothing changes. Everything continues on. You remove gold and silver out of this system, you're going to have a collapse, a complete and utter failure of the entire global economy. Not with Bitcoin. Remove Bitcoin, some people get a little pissed. Remove gold and silver, the whole thing comes undone. All right, so which one's more important? All right, dude, I missed the whole stream until now thanks to a sales call. Well, thank you, Standard Nursery, for showing up. I really appreciate everybody who's hit that like button. Hitting the thumbs up button gets more people to join in on the video once the algorithm has gone through it all and starts spreading it around for everybody. Looking at that thumbs up button, looking at all the comments and the shares and everything that you do, that only supports the Uneducated Economist that much more. Thank you everybody who has joined the school community. We have definitely built that up to quite a few followers now who are in the community, and the conversations that we have there are going to be awesome. Like, I can already see that this community is growing into something that's going to be really great. And we are breaking down the credible threat theory there regularly. You'll have access to all the speeches and all the highlighted parts of those speeches that I have found in order to develop the credible threat theory. It's available there at the school community. So I appreciate everybody who has taken part inside of becoming a member of that school community, which is like just awesome to see happening. And thank you all for being here. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.